and stuff like that. So I'm just trying to pick up on everything as fast as I can.
And what have your conversations been like with Kurt Miller? Just sort of like what he sees for you and...
The phone call came at 3 in the morning, pulling Caitlin Clark out of the deepest sleep she'd had in weeks, her heart pounding before she even answered. The voice on the other end was one she hadn't heard in 15 years, yet she recognized it instantly, as if time had never passed. Caitlin, it's Jake. Jake Patterson from Dowling Elementary. His voice trembled with exhaustion and something far heavier, fear. I know this sounds mad, and we haven't spoken since we were kids, but my little boy, Noah, he's dying, and I don't know who else to turn to. In that moment, it was as if 2 decades collapsed into a single heartbeat. Childhood memories flashed before her. The scraped knees, the playground laughter, the makeshift forts built from blankets and chairs, and the boy who had once promised they would always look out for each other. It's strange, Caitlin thought, how the bonds formed before you even know who you are can outlast everything else. Fame, distance, and the long silence of growing up. She sat up in bed, dazed but alert, as Jake explained through shallow breaths the nightmare his life had become. His 3-year-old son was fighting a rare genetic disorder that was shutting down his organs one by one. The doctors at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia had given him 6 weeks, maybe less, unless they could start an experimental treatment costing over $800,000. An impossible amount for a single father and high school teacher. The insurance company had refused to cover it, calling it investigational. He'd tried crowdfunding, selling everything he owned, but he was still $750,000 short. I know this is insane, he whispered, voice breaking, but you were always the person who made the impossible seem possible. Caitlin didn't hesitate. Jake, give me the doctor's name, the hospital details, everything. I'm going to fix this. By morning, she was on the first flight to Philadelphia, the early dawn light paint. The clouds gold beneath her as she stared out the window and tried to steady her racing thoughts. Her financial advisor had warned her it was reckless. Her publicist had practically begged her to reconsider. If you do this, Caitlin, they'd said, you'll set a precedent. Everyone will start coming to you for help. You can't save the whole world. But she wasn't thinking about her image or her career. She was thinking about an 8-year-old boy who once gave her his lunch money when she forgot hers, about the same boy who told her she was good enough to play basketball for real someday. She was thinking about the promises children make without understanding their weight, and what it means to finally be in a position to keep one. Fame had given her a platform, but it had also created a distance between the person she had become and the girl she used to be. This, she realized, was her chance to bridge that gap, to act, not as Caitlin Clark the athlete or public figure, but as the friend who never stopped caring, even if life had made her forget for a while. When she arrived at the hospital that afternoon, the antiseptic smell of the corridors hit her like a wave, sterile yet suffocating, a blend of hope and heartbreak. Room 314. She paused outside for a moment, gathering herself, then pushed the door open. Jake was there, sitting beside a small bed, holding the tiny hand of a boy who looked so much like him that Caitlin felt her breath catch. The same curious eyes, the same cowlick of hair that never seemed to stay down, even after all these years. Jake stood quickly, his expression torn between disbelief and gratitude. You came, he murmured. Of course I did, she said softly. I told you once I'd always be there. For the first time in months, he smiled. A fragile, exhausted smile, but one that held the faintest glimmer of hope. Over the next days, Caitlin met with doctors, administrators, and financial officers, cutting through red tape and bureaucracy with the same determination she once brought to the court. The hospital's head of research explained the treatment in detail, an experimental gene therapy that could potentially restart Noah's failing systems. It had worked in 2 prior cases, both outside the United States, but funding and legal clearances made it nearly impossible for average families to access. Caitlin offered to pay for it in full, insisting on anonymity at first, but word eventually leaked. Within 48 hours, her decision was trending across social media. WNBA star funds life-saving treatment for dying child. The headlines multiplied, and while public praise poured in, so did criticism. accusations of performative charity, of using tragedy for publicity. Yet none of that mattered to her when she saw Noah's monitors begin to stabilize days later. When she saw Jake collapse in tears beside his son's bed, whispering thank yous she could barely bear to hear, Caitlin felt something shift deep within her. As she sat in the dim hospital room one evening, watching little Noah sleep, she realized how rare it was in life to be called back to your origins, to be given a second chance to act from pure humanity rather than calculation. Somewhere along the path to greatness, she had learned to protect herself. Contracts, endorsements, controlled interviews, filtered emotions. But here, none of that mattered. Here, she was just a girl from Iowa sitting beside her childhood friend, hoping that kindness still counted for something. The world had become noisy, cynical, and transactional, but this was real. When Noah's condition began to improve after the second round of therapy, Caitlin didn't announce it to the press. She simply stayed for a while, reading to him from his favorite picture books. And when Jake finally told her that the doctors believed his son might recover fully, she wept silently, not out of relief alone, but because she understood something profound, that we never truly lose the people who shaped us. They remain, like echoes, ready to return when we need each other most. Before she left Philadelphia, Jake walked her to the airport. There were no grand speeches, no promises of repayment. Just a quiet moment between two people who had once shared juice boxes under the sun and had now shared something infinitely deeper. "You didn't just save Noah," Jake said softly. "You saved me too." Caitlin smiled, touched his shoulder, and replied, "Maybe we just reminded each other who we were." As the plane took off, she gazed down at the city lights, feeling an unfamiliar calm. The world would go back to its noise soon enough. The games, the cameras, the endless opinions. But inside her, something had settled. Sometimes, she realized, it takes a midnight phone call from the past to remind you that greatness isn't measured by trophies or headlines, but by the moments you...
I just think I wanted more from there, and I don't think I would have gotten it there. So if that's undervalued, that's definitely undervalued. And I just feel...
"Daddy?" Noah whispered weakly, his small eyes widening as he looked at the tall woman who had just stepped into the hospital room, her presence somehow soft yet commanding. "Is that the basketball lady you told me about?" Jake looked up, exhaustion etched into every line of his face, but his expression was one of immense gratitude that seemed to radiate through his very being. "Yes, Noah," he said softly, his voice trembling. "That's Caitlin. She's Daddy's oldest friend." Caitlin approached the bed slowly, her heart aching as she took in the sight before her. A fragile, beautiful child surrounded by humming machines and blinking lights, fighting a battle no 3-year-old should ever have to face. "Hi, Noah," she said gently, sitting beside him, forcing a smile through the lump in her throat. "Your dad and I used to get into all sorts of trouble when we were your age." Noah's face lit up with a smile so pure it seemed to illuminate the entire sterile room. "He told me you were going to be famous someday," he said proudly. "He said you were the best basketball player he'd ever seen." Caitlin chuckled softly, glancing at Jake with a knowing warmth. "Your dad was pretty good too," she said, the memory of sunlit playgrounds flickering in her eyes. "He used to beat me in one-on-one all the time." Jake laughed quietly, shaking his head, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as though they were both children again. Yet beneath her calm exterior, Caitlin had already made a decision that would alter all their lives forever. That evening, she met with Dr. Sarah Chin, Noah's oncologist, and the hospital's financial coordinator. Within 2 hours, Caitlin had arranged for the entire cost of Noah's experimental gene therapy treatment, over $800,000, to be paid in full. But she added one condition. This must remain completely anonymous, she insisted, signing the paperwork with steady resolve. "As far as Jake knows, it's a foundation grant. He can never find out it was me." She wanted no recognition, no gratitude, only the chance to save her friend's son. Yet as the weeks passed and Noah's treatment began, Caitlin soon realized how difficult it was to watch Jake's heartfelt gratitude directed toward a nameless benefactor, knowing she was the one who had answered his prayers. Over the next 3 months, Caitlin found excuses to visit Philadelphia regularly. She told Jake she was there for endorsements or training, but in truth, she simply needed to see Noah getting stronger, to witness hope blooming where despair had lived for so long. Slowly, miraculously, Noah's color returned, his energy increased, and one by one, the machines were disconnected. The doctors called it unprecedented progress. Jake called it divine intervention, and every night, he whispered his thanks to the mysterious donor who had saved his son's life, never suspecting that it was the girl who had once shared his lunch money and promised to be his best friend forever. But secrets have their own way of surfacing. 6 months later, Jake received a call from the hospital's billing department about a clerical error. The representative on the phone casually mentioned a name, the Caitlin Clark Foundation, and Jake froze. That evening, he met Caitlin in the hospital cafeteria. "It was you," he said quietly, his voice shaking. "You paid for everything. The treatment, the hospital bills, all of it. You saved Noah's life and never told me." Caitlin's defenses fell away in an instant. "Jake, I can explain," she began, her voice trembling. "I saw what you were going through. I had the means. I couldn't do nothing." But Jake's voice rose, thick with hurt and disbelief. £800,000, Caitlin. You spent that much and let me think it was a stranger. Why hide something so good? Tears welled in her eyes. "Because I was afraid," she admitted, her voice cracking. "Afraid you'd think I was trying to buy your friendship back. Afraid you'd be too proud to accept help from someone who wasn't there when you needed them most. I thought if you knew, you'd remember all the ways I'd failed you." Jake looked at her for a long moment, and in that silence, 15 years of distance seemed to dissolve. "You didn't fail me," he said finally, his voice soft but certain. "I failed you. I was the one who stopped writing. I was the one who let us drift apart. And when my world fell apart, you were the first person I called. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Tears filled Caitlin's eyes as